modern servitude is voluntary, consented to by the mass of slaves who trudge along the face of the earth. They themselves buy the commodities that enslave them every day more. Slaves procure alienating jobs that are bestowed upon the tame. They themselves choose the masters whom they will obey. For this absurd tragedy to play out, it has been necessary to breed in them the ignorance of their own exploitation and alienation. Behold the bizarre modernity of our time, as with the slaves of antiquity, serfs of the Middle Ages, or the working class of the first industrial revolutions. Today we bear witness to an emerging class of the totally enslaved. The difference being, they don't know it, or better yet, choose to ignore it. They fail to recognize the one weapon available to the enslaved: rebellion. Slaves accept without question the pitiful life that was manufactured on their behalf. Apathy and resignation are the sources of their misfortune. Behold the nightmare of the modern-day slave, whose sole aspiration is to be swept away by the macabre dance of the machine of alienation. In this narrow and mournful place they inhabit, slaves accumulate the commodities that, according to the omnipresent advertising, will guarantee happiness and fulfillment. Alas, the more commodities they accumulate, the more elusive happiness becomes. Commodities, ideological by nature, estranged from his work, he who produces them, and divorced from his life, he who consumes them. In the dominant economic system, demand no longer drives supply. It is supply which determines demand. New needs are periodically manufactured and hence considered essential by most people. It began with the radio, followed by the automobile, later the television set, the computer, and now the cell phone. All these commodities, massively distributed over a brief period of time, profoundly alter human relationships. They serve to isolate human beings from their fellow creatures, while at the same time they propagate the dominant messages of the system. Everything we possess will in turn possess us. It is in the way in which the modern slave feeds himself that better illustrates his degree of decay. With little time to spare for the preparation of his sustenance, he is reduced to consuming quick meals produced by the agrochemical industry. He wanders through supermarkets looking for the ersatz that the society of false abundance offers. Once again, his choice is nothing but an illusion. The abundance of food as a commodity is evidence of its degradation and falsification. It is nothing more than genetically modified organisms, a mix of colorants and preservatives, of pesticides, hormones, and other inventions of modernity. However, it is when faced with the indigence of the majority that the Westerner can rejoice in his position of privilege and frenetic consumption. As a consequence, misery is ubiquitous in a totalitarian mercantile society. Scarcity is the other face of the false abundance coin. Despite the ample supply produced by the agrochemical industry, in a system where inequality means progress, hunger must not disappear ever. The other consequence of the alleged food abundance is the multiplication of concentration factories and the massive and barbarous extermination of species for the sustenance of the enslaved. That is the essence of the dominant mode of production. Life and humankind cannot withstand the thirst for profit of a few. The pillage of the planet's resources, the massive production of energy or commodities, the waste products of the ostentatious consumption, jeopardize the possibilities of survival for our planet and the species which inhabit it. However, in order to pave the way for brutal capitalism, the growth must continue. Produce, produce, and keep producing. Those who contaminate are today misrepresenting themselves as the saviors of the planet. Those show business buffoons, sponsored by multinational firms, try to convince us that a simple change in our habits will be enough to save the planet from disaster. And while they blame us, they keep on contaminating the environment and our souls. Those poor pseudo-ecological views are repeated by corrupt politicians in need of advertising slogans. Those in charge take pains to avoid making significant change in the production system, and as always, change is half-hearted and superficial. Things remain as they are and have always been. In order to participate in the round of frenetic consumption, one must have means and one must, therefore, work. In other words, one must sell oneself. The dominant system champions work as its most esteemed value. Slaves have to work more to buy on credit their miserable lives. Slaves wear out in the workplace. They waste their vital strength and have to suffer the worst humiliations. They spend their lives performing grueling tasks for the benefit of a few. Modern unemployment is invented as a scare tactic to force slaves into endless gratitude for the generosity of the power elite. What would they do if they didn't have to suffer this torture called work? These alienating activities are touted as freeing. What degradation and what misfortune! always pressured on by the time clock or the whip. Every movement of the slave is designed to increase productivity. The scientific organization of labor is at the heart of the worker's divestment from himself, the fruit of his labor and his time, which is misspent in the automated production of commodities or services. The worker's labor is mistaken for that of the machine in the factories or the computer in the office. Paid time will never be recovered. Every worker is assigned a repetitive duty, be it physical or intellectual. The worker is a specialist in his own field. This specialization can be seen on a worldwide scale within the framework of the International Division of Labor. Conceived in the West, produced in Asia, and lethal in Africa.